one of my first questions is, what are your values? And oftentimes people will be like, oh, what are our values? Like, it's just not maybe front and center of their minds. And also when you ask different employees what their values are, what the organizational values are, they may or may not know. For me, that is kind of like, if you don't know what your values are, then how do you hold people to that standard? It's the same thing when I used to work with students, and I used to always say this thing, like, I cannot hold you to expectations that I've never set. So it's the same thing in the workplace, right? If you have values, but people are not being held to those expectations, then everyone will interpret and, practice however they would like to, right?
Welcome to Unpacked Culture Chronicles. I'm Danielle Marshall, an equity strategist and executive coach, and I'm thrilled to have you here. This podcast is all about exploring cultural differences, similarities, and the ways that we can begin to bridge across them. Together, we're going to dive into meaningful conversations with guests from all walks of life. We'll share stories, insights, and practical strategies for navigating the complexity of culture in our workplaces, communities, and personal lives. My guest today is someone who's not only a longtime colleague, but also a friend who continues to inspire me. Mariam Abdullah, also known as Coach Mo. Mo and I have worked together for years, and even after our respective transitions out of our organization, our paths kept crossing, which is really a testament to the kind of meaningful work that she leads and the communities she helps build. So welcome to the show, Mo.
Thank you for having me, Danielle. It's always great to have time to chat.
Absolutely. I'm excited about this. I'd love for you to just maybe kick us off by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your work.
So, I've been playing around with it, but I would introduce myself as a professional energizer of people, teams, and culture. And so a lot of my work looks like training, creating spaces for people to build skills to help them energize conversations around collaboration, inclusion. A lot of it also looks like giving people permission to be their fun, silly, and free selves, and getting energized to tap into the best versions of ourselves. And then also energizing organizations. So like, how do we bring people together as an organization and really align under our values? And how do we hold people accountable to that? So that's a little bit about my work. But beyond that, I am a foodie. Love food. I love to travel. I am an auntie, which is one of my favorite roles as a human being. And I am a lover of joy and playing games. Yeah. So that's me.
I do love a well-rounded introduction. And for folks who are just getting to know Mo, I mean, I can totally vouch for that. Everywhere you go, your energy is just infectious. And I think people gravitate towards you. And you almost can't stop yourself from having fun in your presence. And so I will appreciate that right now off the top, because that has been a joy as I've gotten to know you over the years. So let's dive in. And I know a lot of the work that you do right now is in transforming workplace cultures. And I was kind of curious as we were getting ready for this call to hear back maybe in your own words what you think the difference is between having a workplace culture and having a resilient workplace culture.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, a work culture is going to exist, whether or not it's intentional or unintentional. But for me, workplace culture is a series of norms, practices, behaviors, and values that individuals collectively and also individually practice on a day-to-day basis. And I think what the difference is between an unintentional work culture versus a resilient work culture is really all about how can an environment sort of be flexible and bend, right? We know that in the workplace, there are things that happen around tensions, lack of communication, low morale, stress, all these different things that can happen to individuals in a workplace. And having a resilient workplace is an intentional workplace where instead of those things happening and then, the culture sort of breaks, a resilient culture is where it bends, right? But it doesn't break. and it allows for conversations, it allows for skill building, it allows for people to, again, come back to a common place and be able to move forward. And I also think too, there's just a level of intentionality. When I think about work cultures, it's like there are things that people intentionally do, but I also think that there are things that organizations just may not do. That's also a part of a culture. And for example, like if you are in a workplace where people are constantly getting interrupted, right? That is a part of a culture. But also, on the other side of that, when these interruptions happen and it's not called out, or there's no level of repair that happens, that is also part of a culture. And that other piece is the lack of resiliency, I think, that can happen in a workplace.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts?
I mean, well, that definitely speaks to me because I often say that we either get the culture that we plan for or we get the culture that emerges. So I can definitely, hear you loud and clear as you say that. And I'm appreciating, I think, what you said around the intentionality and even something as simple as, to your point, people talking over one another in a meeting, right? Or we only listen to one person's ideas. If you let that sort of stagnate and like that's just the way it is around here, it does feed the culture. Right. And
Hmm.
so I'm kind of wondering, like, from your perspective, like when you come into organizations and you see these types of things happening, right? You've sat back, you've done some observation, gotten a kind of look and feel for what's been going on. What are the tools that you use maybe to disrupt those patterns, like as you're seeing them?
I mean, oftentimes I come in and I ask just a lot of questions. And one of my first questions is probably like, what are your values? And oftentimes people will be like, oh, what are our values? Like it's just not maybe front and center of their minds. And also when you ask different employees what their values are, what the organizational values are, they may or may not know. And for me, that is kind of like, if you don't know what your values are, then how do you hold people to that standard? It's the same thing when I used to work with students. And I used to always say this thing like, I cannot hold you to expectations that I've never set.
Ooh, yes, yes.
And so it's the same thing in the workplace, right? When if you have values, but people are not being held to those expectations, then everyone will interpret and, you know, practice however they would like to, right? And then what you start to get is really inconsistency um and how work culture is like again being practiced, and then also on the individual level asking people, what do you personally value, asking managers, asking leaders, and also being able to tie what they value to their organizational values, because then I have a personal why, I have a
Mhm.
personal stake in, you know, if I'm being asked to have a new norm or a new practice, it's not so much like, oh, they're making me do this, but it's like, oh, it's all aligned, because at the end of the day, we're all moving as an organization to uphold ourselves to these core values that we say matter to us.
Mhm. I had a reaction as you were saying that because it took me back to my childhood, right? And my mom, I remember being maybe I was like 13 or 14, something in there, and she said, "You'll be able to do this thing, whatever it happened to be, when you demonstrate that you're mature." And I was like, okay, let's do this. And I kept asking her, I was like, can I do this yet? And she was like, no, you're not showing maturity yet at the level that I'm expecting. But to your point, what she failed to tell me, and I wish I could go back in time and be like, Mommy, guess what? I figured out some new language, right? She never told me in her eyes what maturity meant. It was just that there was this standard, right? And so I do see that translating to the workforce where we, again, we say that we have these values. And I'm going to tie this back to something else you said. Like we can maybe identify our organizational values, our individual values, but what I see people failing to do is go that extra step to define what the value looks like in practice,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like if
Yeah.
I say I want to be respected, cool. Like we have a practice of, or excuse me, a value of respect around here. But in practice, what does that look like? Because if you can't name the specific thing, so like maybe it means not talking over the colleague in a meeting. Maybe it means that we arrive on time, we end on time, but you need to be able to spell out what those values look like.
Absolutely. And I think too, again, my journey is very unique in which I've worked in the education, in classrooms. And, what I found is that like a lot of these skills and expectations and also just like strategies that I've been using in the classroom apply to the workplace. And so these same sort of conversations, when I go into a new environment or a new classroom and I have be respectful, be safe, written on the board, we actually take time and pull in the students. Like, what do you think that means?
Yeah.
And then once I get their collective, then I also set the tone of like, in this space, this is what's this going to mean. These are the words that we're going to be using, and giving them language as well. And I think a lot of times in the workplace, we kind of just assume because we're adults that it's just common sense. And what is common sense to
It's
one
not so
person
common.
is not so common. And unless you explicitly say that, because again, like we're all coming with our own cultures, our own values, how we've grown up, especially with our students, like, making fun of somebody could be a sign of respect or community. But like in this space, that can turn into something really, really dangerous. And so, unless we're being specific and taking the time and recognizing that just because we are adults, we cannot expect people to be always on the same page around, again, these loaded words of being respectful, of being inclusive. You
Yeah.
have to break it down.
I'm completely with you because I think in my own consulting work, I spend a lot of time with definitions. And I find lately most people are appreciating it. And I think there's a tie into just how polarized our world is. We do not see things the same. We do not define things the same way. And even when we think there's a common word, how people are hearing it and interpreting it in their own lives looks vastly different. So I'm appreciating that you're also holding groups to that piece. But I wanted to get back to resilience for a second because you talked about sort of resilience within organizations and even thinking about resilience within individuals. But how do we begin to build this skill of resilience, right? And how does your work support it?
Yeah, I think resilience really starts with trust, right? Like, in order for us to do hard things, um, and have hard conversations, I think that you also have to be in an environment that helps you, at least feel like you belong enough to try.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where, I think a lot of gaps are where people might expect that skill of you, but when you think about the Haslow, like what is it,
The
the
Maslow
pyramid
hierarchy.
of needs,
Mm-hmm.
right? In order for me, again, to get to that next level of practicing resilience and wanting to be resilient, you have to have a baseline of safety and belonging. And how does that happen? It happens where you have an organization or a priority to build rapport. And that's when we start talking about the power of small talk in an organization and how powerful even those small moments of connection, instead of running straight into a meeting where again we all log on like 5 minutes early and we just chat about life, or it could be even something that's silly, but having those moments structured and unstructured where people are able to build trust, and you know chat with people where it's not just so much like goal based, work based, but getting to know people as people helps us again to see people in different lights, especially when we have to have, more difficult conversations or collaborating for the first time. Um, I see the power in that. And I also know, like, from personal experience, uh, how important that is, because again we all come with our own biases, and so even though we might like somebody, we can often also put people in boxes, right? We can see people, assume what their skill level is, assume what they want to do, and that can also put limitations on us.
Yeah.
And once we start limiting and assuming, and you have a culture of that, then it becomes harder and harder to actually build the skill and environment for resiliency.
Yeah. Like as you're sharing that, I'm having flashback to like several conversations I've had in the last couple of weeks with clients and friends, and they're like, "I hate small talk, and I don't know why we have to start our meetings with it." And I'm like, I wish I could put you in front of them to share a little bit more about that. But someone said something to me the other day, and it has really stuck with me. And they said the power of small talk for them is that I need to be able to trust you with simple information, like how was your weekend, and right, like we're talking about our kids or our families or your favorite flavor ice cream. We don't really care what it is, but something that is small before I can trust you with the bigger things. And when she said that to me, I mean, that one landed on my soul because I'm like, how true is that? Like, we want to go into conversations about some of the most difficult things. What do we do around funding? What do we do around DEI initiatives? Who do we hire? Who do we not hire in this organization? And I can't even have a conversation with you about what you did on the weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, it's a skill that I practice even as a trainer, right? A lot of what I do, especially, with the background in diversity, equity, inclusion, and you're coming into these spaces, and I'm aware that I'm a Black woman, and I know that like there's a lot of people coming into space with different identities. Like people are stressed oftentimes when they're coming into these spaces. And if the first time that you hear my voice is when I'm just went ahead and started the training, then I've missed a crucial opportunity. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll come in an hour early just to make sure I set up. And then the 20 minutes before the actual training, I'm just going from table to table, like, hey, how's it going? Like, what brings you here today? What are you excited to learn? Or even like, how was lunch? Do you have any summer plans? And literally just going table to table so that people have a different perspective of me instead of just this trainer that's coming in to tell us certain things. And I can see how that starts to lower the tension. But yeah, like how important that is to have again touch points with people
Yeah.
to be able to see you.
So it sounds like you focus both on rapport building when you're in spaces, facilitation spaces, or workshops, but it also sounds like team building is foundational for organizations to build that trust, that resilience. And, I also know at this time, particularly with a lot of funding cuts for, groups across the country, people might see this as like, a nice to have. We don't have time for team building. We have other bills we need to pay. Like, how do you view that?
Honestly, I try to push back a little bit more just because I think people want like I literally just had a call today and one of the priorities for their staff retreat is that they wanted better communication. And they were like, yeah, we just want some best practices. But I was like, well, let's hold on for a second. I was like, well, what is better communication? Like, what is happening right now? Like, what is the root cause of the communication that you have? And they were like, oh, well, like some people don't like this and this and this and this. And I was like, okay, so it looks like we're going to be having some tough conversations, right? Because we need to get to the root cause. And then I was like, cool. So before we get to the tough conversations, we're going to have to build some trust, right? And I was like, yeah. So like, I'm going to have some like team building games. And immediately they were like, games?
We don't play games.
Yeah, like games. And I was like, yeah, like, we have to build an environment in people's capacity. It's like when I go into schools and instead of playing a really like intense and complicated game, especially like when you might have to get out, right? I have to first build your capacity in little doses. And that's the same sort of like framework that I have when it comes to the importance of team building and how it gets us to having the capacity to have these larger and more difficult conversations. Yeah, I think it's like that level of correlation where like you can't just jump into it. You can't just expect people, especially if they haven't been doing that in the first place,
Right.
to be able to just jump in and then meet those, like have a really productive conversation. Because what's going to happen is that people are going to either stay silent, not be honest, and it's not going to give you the value that you think you're going to have. And so you have to build your capacity through team building, right? Getting people's mixing and moving. There's power and again, mixing in, having those great conversations with different people. I also think too, not always keeping it so like, well, this is the goal, but this is the goal, this is the goal. It's like we will always get there. There's also like so many things happen when you play, right? Like you're actually practicing communication, you're actually practicing strategy, you're actually practicing a lot of the skills that at the end of the day you want to have, but we're kind of doing it in different spaces to allow people again to practice different skills.
Yeah. It's interesting you started out talking about children, right, and play, and we've sort of worked into adults because the same basic foundation is there for me as I hear you talking. It's really about scaffolding learning. Right. So for the kids, it might be the recess game. Like, we're going to start you really simple. Here's one rule, and then we can build into this next thing, next step that we're going to do in the game. But with adults, even from a foundational, we need to build trust. Maybe it's that small talk on day one. And now we're going to sort of ramp up with each activity until there really is a solid root of trust. There's more resilience that's present on the team. But I asked you a question a moment ago about sort of how people are looking at the investments, right? Like, is this a nice to have? Is it something we absolutely have to do for our team? And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the ROI when it comes to like prioritizing whether it's trust building or psychological safety. What does that look like for you in your experience?
Yeah, I definitely think there has been a level of people kind of like pulling back from that and trying to focus on, other priorities when it comes to professional development. A lot of people are actually trying to do it in house instead of having a facilitator come in. And I think the power of having a facilitator come in, number one, is that like everyone in your organization will get to participate instead of like one person having to step out and not having the full experience. And I also think too that like not everybody has a well-rounded training experience. And so what ends up happening is that like you're kind of at the mercy of the person's skill set that's already in your organization.
Absolutely.
And so it could be very PowerPoint heavy. It might be harder for them to lead more difficult conversations and get honest feedback rather than having an outside facilitator be able to help navigate those spaces that also has the expertise in that. I also think another return on investment, especially like with the work that we do, is that like we specialize in team building. And a lot of times the feedback that I get after a training was like, wow, like we've never had an interactive experience where there was storytelling, right? You're hearing not just stories from within the organization, but stories because I'm traveling from organization to organization to organization, and I'm able to sort of tell the story. And I think there's so much power in storytelling as a facilitator because number one, they hear the mindset changes that happen throughout a story. They also hear the vulnerability. And I think it helps humanize the challenges that they're experiencing and letting them know that, like, wow, like, you're not the only one. And this is kind of where another person has started. And this is kind of like what led them to a more successful path. So I get a lot of like, wow, like, I've been able to chat with people that I haven't really been chatting with, having a space to actually be honest and share feedback with different people. And I think too, at the end of the day, like what we offer is a space where like people can build onto their skills that they have. I think when we talk about like the return on investment, a lot of people want like actual tangible things that people can leave with. Like we don't want to just sit at a 3 hour training and then revert back to, the behaviors that we already had. So I think what's interesting too about scaffolding is that when you take the time to break down the different skills, it actually makes it more sticky and tangible. And that learning approach can actually be more sustainable than just, again, what you can do internally.
Mm-hmm. I'm loving this, right? And you know me, I love a good story. I have been known to tell a story in my time. And also the reason for the podcast, because I want people to be able to share their stories. But I think what you were just getting at, and strikes me as particularly important as a facilitator myself, is this idea that when we are facilitating, when you have a good facilitator in front of you, if we're doing guided facilitation, you might not be someone who's typically used to talking about whatever it is, but like having a well positioned question, something that is very specific for you to talk about. Like you can approach it from whatever angle you want to, but it doesn't feel like it's this loosely structured, like, hey, we just want you to sit down and talk about what ails you at the organization. No, let's talk about a very specific instance, or how is this emerging? And I think that allows people who might not have as much to say typically to feel a little bit more comfortable, because it's a narrower focus. And then it allows people to continue to build upon it, right? So you say one thing and I'm like, oh, and that reminds me of this other thing that happened. And so I'm going to now add that. And before you know it, like we're really sitting in a deep conversation about whatever the issue at hand happens to be.
Yeah, and I also think too, like there's a lot of fear that people come into these types of trainings too around retaliation and how, if I'm too honest, like how is that going to affect relationships once I get back? And so having a professional that can come and help set the tone, set the environment, in a new way, I think that's also again helps people get to their ROI,
Mhm.
of
And
why they're
I'll
having the
add
training in the first
in,
place.
oh, sorry. I will add in additionally from a leadership perspective, I think there's another ROI, because I just had this happen last week it was, and I facilitated a board retreat. And the executive director says to me, she goes, "Thank God you're here. I'm so happy it's you." She's like, "I can sit back and relax and actually participate." Right. And so, to your point, I don't think it's just about the team, but I think in the right dynamics, you're even allowing the leadership to be a member of the team as opposed to having to be on call checking for everything. And so,
Yes.
I think that's huge, because they can literally start to cultivate new ideas to hear their teams in different ways because they're not in the managerial role at that moment.
Yeah, I think it helps at time like alleviate some of those power dynamics that might, and the way I try to structure it is that like when we do activities, like everyone, like we're all in this together, where if it's a team building type of game, like there is no hierarchy of like I'm often and I'm often. It's like if we're going to commit to this experience, let's commit to this experience, and we have these aha moments together, that I think that are so powerful, that again continue to create that space of like, you are a full participant, whether you are a leader, a manager, or again, an employee. So yeah, it just kind of allows everyone to kind of like be at that level field of like, we're all going to be learning this together. We're all going to be participating. And then again, having an outside facilitator really set the expectations. Like we're not going to be checking emails. We're not going to be like on our phones, but we're all going to be kind of like present.
Yeah. And I don't want to dismiss that power dynamics are still present, because if you have a senior leader in the room, they're still in their
True.
position in there while they're sitting there. However, there is a difference between them being the person standing in the front of the room and delivering the content, and them being able to actively participate with the rest of the team. And I think that's something, especially as a former ED myself, that we don't have enough opportunity to do, where it feels like we can be a member of the team. It always feels like you're in charge of the team. This episode of Unpacked Culture Chronicles is brought to you by Culture Principles, an executive coaching and consulting practice that helps leaders and organizations turn inclusion from an idea into everyday practice. If you've been listening and thinking, I want to grow my cultural awareness, but I'm not sure where to begin, you're certainly not alone. And that's exactly why we created the Cultural Competency Executive Coaching Program, a space to deepen self-awareness, lead with cultural humility, and build stronger connections across difference. You can learn more at culture-principles.com/coaching. I'd love to support you. So let me pivot a little bit, because as we were preparing for the call, you had mentioned, trust building and rapport, and thinking about resilience teams is a means to expand cognitive pathways. And I thought that was such an interesting framing that you use. Can you unpack that for me? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I think it at the root of a lot of our communication and even I think a lot of like the conflict that happens in the workplace, a lot of it is rooted in bias and recognizing that we all have cognitive patterns that we have. So, for example, um, you know, if I meet somebody for the first time and, let's say like something in their personality is just not sticking with me, right? Like we're just not really connected, or something feels off to me, right? I have now created a cognitive pattern that again can continue to grow. So then once I meet this person again, or when it comes to collaboration, how I engage might look very different, right? I might not call on that person as much. I might not assume that if there is a leadership position that this person might be a good fit for that. And that again internalizes continued cognitive patterns that again affect decision making, affect the way I communicate, affect how I choose to build trust or not to build trust. And I think what the story that comes to mind is when I was working in the workplace. I had, I'm a very like bubbly, like I am an extrovert. I'm always like, what's going on? What you doing? I'm that person in the workplace. Like, I'm going to people's desks and chatting. But I remember going and there was this individual that was very like analytical thinking, and oftentimes in like when I would share, like I'm a visionary person too, like in meetings, especially in our first meeting, like I had all of these ideas, and they were the kind of person that was just like, but is that really going to work? And what about this? And did we think about this? And then, in my head, I'm like, oh, this person's a Debbie Downer. Like, like this is just not going to work. And I found that unconsciously that anytime I'd come into the office, like I just really would not engage with this person. And it started to like, again, not always intentionally, but like it just wasn't a person that like I was choosing to build community with or build trust with. And I remember that at some point we got put together and working as a team. It was me and this individual going to another school. And I remember it was a week long project too. I remember initially the first 2 days I was micromanaging because I was like, oh, this person doesn't really have like the personality that I'm going to do. I'm going to be very front facing. I'm going to be having, giving all these presentations, and what this person would do again, so gracefully, right? Like they didn't really make too much of a fuss, but they just allowed me to do that. But they were very observant. And I remember when it came down to do a debrief meeting at this with this project, I was just kind of like not really prepared because I was kind of like doing all these different things, trying to take on all the responsibility. And they stepped in, and for the first time, I saw that like their skill of being so observant and giving clear feedback and giving just like really detailed and also like really positive, and just the way that they were able to navigate those situations. Like I was like, oh wow, like I started to see the value in how this person was navigating the situation. And also I was overworked. And so then I was like, okay, well, like you did so well here. Like I started having more conversations, and also again giving props. And once again we started to like see each other in different lights, the rest of the week there was a level of collaboration that had not existed there, based off of again my own patterns of cognitive bias that was causing me not to be able to see the value of what he brought to the table, but also as an individual. Then I found out again through that whole entire project that we had so much in common, also so much that was different about us that I didn't even know, like skill sets that I didn't even know. And I was like, oh, we could have used you for this project, and we could have used you for this. And I think that like, when we talk about resilient workforces, or workplaces, understanding that like this is a common practice that we all have. As a humans, we all have bias. Doesn't make us bad people. But if we are not constantly again trying to expand how we see people, then we limit people. And when we limit people, then we don't see the full breadth of diversity and talent that can be at our organization's disposal. and also how do we elevate people? And so I think that for me was a really important, recollection that I had to have, and also just like how that also impacted me, right? Like I was able to free up space for myself, and not feel so overworked by trusting somebody and trusting their skill and what they brought to the table to be able to sort of like handle that and trust that, like, just because you don't do it like me does not mean that you cannot be successful and your value is not
There is
there.
so much in what you just said. First off, I'm going to say, like, what a powerful noticing that you had to be able to recognize, like, my own bias in this moment is what is preventing me from connecting with this person, right? For seeing them in their fullness. And I think that's so important because, to your point, like we all have bias. Like my friend Kat Lazaroff just did a podcast. She was on Mission Impact, and she talked about biases being similar to armpits. We all have them, and they stink, right? Like, and so I could only laugh when I heard her say that. But like, what a good description of it. Um, but the idea behind the biases is like, how do we get aware first off? So like, how do we notice it for ourselves, and then how do we start to, once we notice it, figure out what we want to do with it? And I think the beautiful thing that you ended on was like this idea that it didn't just impact the person or the relationship, but it impacts you, right? So like when we lean into power hoarding and, well, I got to do it all myself because there's only one right way and I know the right way in this instance, like we then take on the burden of literally doing everything, right? To the point of exhaustion and burnout. And we're not really effective as a team player, if you're to think about it, like, because it's always got to be my way, right? It's my show. And so you're not only burnt out, but the rest of your team is like, well, look, apparently you don't need us on the court because you're going to play this whole game by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's so powerful. I think like a lot of times we stop at the conversation of like, oh, we all have biases, right? And the reality is I think the next level is understanding that like it is a pattern, right? That it doesn't just stop with, oh, like, my brain just works in creating like these things. Like it can be really abstract until you start to really break it down of like, oh, like, if I think about the people who I automatically go to in the workplace, okay, cool. But then go a step further, say, who do I not automatically go to in the workplace?
Yes, that part.
And during a meeting, do I even look to see if their hand is raised? Do I even ask for their input? Do I, when I hear new opportunities, do I know what their skill set is? Do I know what they bring to the team? And when you start having those conversations with yourself and you start seeing your own patterns, then I think that like that's where resiliency starts, right? Okay, now I need to like, this person actually has value. I need to have a level of curiosity to start to build resiliency. And it might be hard, right? Because talking to, this individual, for
It
me was like
challenges
talking
you.
to my opposite,
Yeah.
right? It was like dry. It was kind of awkward at times. And I was like, I don't really know,
Mm.
how
Yeah.
to
Where
find
do I
common
start?
ground. Exactly. And so, but I think part of resiliency is that like you can do hard things. And also the reality is that like once you pass that threshold of like, okay, like this person is just like so opposite from me, and you push past that, a lot of times you find commonalities that you may not even know that existed, or you become an observer and you're like, oh, I like how this person did this and all that type of jazz. So all of that can start to happen once you start to recognize that not just I have biases, but what are my own patterns and how is that affecting my own peace
Yes.
and life and work
Yes.
experience, but also the larger
Mhm.
consequences of it.
Even how you framed that question, and I think we all do this at some point, right? Like, does this other person have value to the context of the situation? And I part of me wants to reframe the question, and I don't say this to you because I could very well be talking to me and I am talking to me in this instance. is what is the value that they bring to this? Because I
Mm,
believe inherently we all have value, but it's this idea of like, well, do you have it or not? That I think allows us to just dismiss people, right?
yeah,
You don't know enough about this. You haven't worked here long enough. You don't have this lived experience. And I'm like, but they have so many other experiences. If you could look at it as like, how is your particular skill set, your experience, your background useful in this moment to whatever we're trying to solve as a team? Right, like that's a whole nother level of conversation we can have, because the values there, and even if they don't have something that's useful in that particular context, it does not make them less valuable, right? There's
mm,
still a value to the conversation, to the workplace, et cetera. It just may be that their skill set is going to take a backseat on this particular thing, but you could move into a new, issue tomorrow, and all of a sudden they're at the head of the class because they have the exact experience that speaks and aligns to that issue. Right. And so I'm
absolutely.
trying really hard, even for myself. And I say this particularly at a point where we are so polarized, to not be dismissive of the things that people say and what they have to offer in these moments, because while I might not need it in every context, it is still needed. It is what makes the world function.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's a muscle, right? Like how do you engage with difference?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so
On that note, all right, so let's talk about one of the challenging areas around difference right now, right? So DEI has undergone a tremendous amount of shifts in recent months. Um, and I'm kind of wondering from your perspective and the work that you do, is what you think is maybe missing in the ways that organizations have approached DEI in the past.
I think, I was reflecting on this with a lot of other like DEI practitioners and people in this space. And it's been interesting to hear kind of like the feedback or the observations that a lot of people have had. I think a lot of times it has been DEI has lived in HR and been very much like a hiring talent space where again it's all about like the people that are coming in to the organizations and fitting those quotas as well. And then I also think at times it's been like very limiting in perspective. I think at times like it's been too heavily on just race and gender as the main conversations without understanding intersectionality of the different identities that an entire individual might have and how that might create um, situations where again they might have a closer proximity to power, but also at the same time, have an identity that might be marginalized in another situation. In that complexity, instead of having like these larger sort of buckets, I think. Especially in the workplace, that's kind of been what I've been hearing as an observation. And I also think too around diversity and inclusion that like as much as we've talked about it, it still seems like we're using the words in a lot of different ways. Like there's still like, a lot of people that are attaching definitions or what they assume those conversations are and what the goal is around them to be, you know, completely different things. And then finally, I think that some of the pushback has been too that like at times it's been performative in a lot of organizations where, again, it wasn't tied to their value system. It was more so just like a separate initiative and not in the DNA of the organization. And so it was easy to cut. It was easy to, roll back because it wasn't attached to anything, right? It's kind of like a t-shirt. It's like, I like it right now.
Just
It's
rip it
cool.
off.
It's great. And then when I'm like done with it, versus like, oh, this is my leg, right? Like this is something that I need to like walk and move forward with.
Uh-huh.
It's you have to think more about that. Yeah. You want to say something?
A really different perspective on the performative, right? And not to negate anything that you said, because I'm in full agreement with you on that. But here's the thing that I would say about the performative nature of DEI. Those companies that were performing, they're not anymore. And in a very strange way, while people are worried about DEI going away, I'm actually glad that they're not performing, right? Because they muddied the water as to what DEI was, because people were looking at them and they're like, well, you have these statements, you say that this matters to you, but we're not seeing you actually do anything. And so now that those people have given up the pretense of it, what I am able to see much more clearly is who the companies are that were actually dedicated to this to begin with. Those people who had it centered at the heart of their mission, it's in their business plan, it's in how they work with vendors and clients in the community, or the people that they sell to. It is so evident, and they don't need a statement, right? It is literally built into the foundation of their work. And so it's interesting to me at a time where people are saying that DEI is going away. I think maybe the term DEI may become outdated. And to your point, we don't define it the same way anyway, but it is taking on a life of its own, because these are hardcore values that certain people possess and they walk through life with. And I don't see those values shifting as quickly with folks who were committed to this as opposed to performative to begin with.
Yeah, I can also see that as well. I think that there's just been a lot of attention, I think, on these larger companies and universities in general. Like every so often you'll see like this person is canceling this DEI. But I think also too, there's been a lot of pushback and a lot of people standing their ground. And then also again, there's people that have been doing this work for years, just like you mentioned, where again it is very much, it wasn't loud during the, yeah, it was
They
just
didn't
like,
have to be loud because it
yeah, it
was
didn't have to
who
be
they
loud,
were.
like
Yeah.
it was like this is what we're going to continue to commit with. And those are the companies, I think, a lot of time that have like, because it has been embedded into their organization's DNA, like these are the companies again that a lot of times they have it as a norm and practices. And when you go into their space, like a lot of times you'll hear it in the language, you'll see it in the emails, if you're on a call with them or a group call, you'll start to see a little bit of these practices and languages come out because it's a culture that
And
they
that
have.
goes back to even the values conversation we were having earlier. Like, how do you demonstrate it? What does it look like in practice? And I am such a proponent of that because I don't think we have to explain ourselves on so many fronts. You just live the thing out. So, like, if you are an intelligent person, if you are a beautiful person, you don't have to stand on a street corner and be like, I'm brilliant and I'm gorgeous too, right? Like, people can see this and experience it in interacting with you or visually seeing you. So to me, like, we don't need to stand there with a bullhorn and scream these things like, here's my statement. No, show me, right? I will
Yeah,
believe you when I see it with my own eyes.
yeah. And I think too, a lot of, what I'm also seeing and reading around, like people maybe um uh you know maybe pulling back from DEI, but not really. I think what's also happening is that people are just getting more connected to their values, right? And using their values as a way to kind of like get more grounded. And of course, like diversity, equity, inclusion is not the end all be all. It's supposed to be a tool to help you live out the values that you say matter to you. And so, that type of language will always, be shifting and changing. But I think at the end of the day, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it will never go away
Yeah.
because
I
your
don't I
values will
don't
never go
expect.
away.
No, it's not going away
Yeah.
because we are not going away. People are not going away, right? And
Yes.
I won't even repeat this. I've said this so many times on this podcast, but actually I'm going to repeat it in case this is a
Do
new
it.
listener today, but like, we have got to stop weaponizing the word diversity to begin with, right? It is the one word that I really take issue with when it comes to DEI as a framework to begin with, because what has happened in this country is that DEI, or excuse me, diversity in particular, has been used as a word to otherize people who are not white, not male, cisgender, able bodied, Christian, dominant culture in this country. And so, if you're going to come at it from that standpoint, like, what you're missing is the actual definition of diversity was designed to encompass all of us. Collectively, we make up diversity. I am not diverse because I am not male, white, cisgender, so forth. We together make up diversity. And so I think that was the biggest issue I saw with maybe sort of the downfall. There are a lot of issues, by the way, and I'm not going to get into all of them just because of time today. But one of the things is it's hard to see yourself as part of an initiative when you believe diverse means everybody but you. So white people
Yes.
felt excluded from this movement because they weren't diverse. And in reality, they were always part of the diversity. It's just that they did not see it because they were part of dominant culture. right? And so I think there are a lot of maybe lessons that have been learned by us, by other practitioners, but sadly also from people who are very anti-DEI. And so I think they're picking up on those threads, and like that's what they're building their platforms on, is like, well, this is why this didn't work, and don't you remember how you felt shamed and you didn't feel like a part of the team, and dot dot dot. And so like they can make these arguments, but it was never meant to be that way. It was meant to equalize the playing field. And I think that has gotten lost in the sauce, if you will, because so many other things were being brought in at one time. It's hard to focus on what the actual issues are.
Yes. Yeah, I like that quote. A person is unique and people are diverse.
I haven't heard that one before. I appreciate that. So Mo, before we close out the show today, I wanted to just ask you if you have anything coming up in your business that you wanted to share with people. What are you excited about moving forward?
I am excited about expanding as a company and our offerings. Again, like we've been doing a lot of interactive, foundational based diversity, equity, inclusion trainings for the last 6 years. But like you've probably heard through this podcast, my foundation is working also with students in and out of the classroom. And so, yeah, we've been expanding to offer more trainings to work directly with students, but also what I've been noticing is that there's gaps in adults' skill level to be able to navigate and work with students as well. So we've also now started to offer trainings for adults that work specifically with youth and kids to be able to build their skill level, their awareness level, and their capacity to build inclusive and safe environments, whether it's your summer program, your after school program, your camp. Especially like I'm here in Philadelphia, like there's so many student-led organizations, but again, once we get in there, oftentimes they're not always given the skills to be able to navigate and build intentional norms and practices that we mentioned with their students. And so we've sort of expanded our offerings to be able to train and educate and energize those adults as well.
Love it. And how can people get in touch with you?
You can find us at our website, on our website, so www.cultureenergized.com. We're also on Instagram at cultureenergized. And then you can also just send me an email if you're interested in learning more about what we do, or even just networking, because again, we love to talk over here. So yeah, you can email us at cultureenergized@gmail.com as well.
Okay. Well, Mo, it has been such a pleasure to have you on today. I love talking to you in general. I feel like we can go on and on for a while, but it was wonderful to have you join me today.
Yes, thank you for having me. And as I always say, anytime we exit our call, I'm like, what are you going to do that's going to bring you joy?
Ooh, I am going fishing this weekend. I don't know how much joy it's going to bring me, but it's different. And listeners, I'm going to tell you, Mo has something where she is frequently doing Freedom Fridays. And so finding something fun to do on Fridays. Maybe we'll come back and talk about that another day. But I feel like I have been challenged on multiple occasions to find something useful that is joyous to do with my time on a Friday. So this weekend we'll be fishing.
Oh, that sounds exciting. Well, I hope you have a fantastic time.
I appreciate that. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
All right, peace.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. It makes a big difference in helping us grow this community. And if you're looking for coaching or resources to take your cultural awareness to the next level, visit us at culture-principles.com/coaching. And remember, where curiosity leads, connection follows. Be well.